Welcome to History Night. This is a venue of the Springettsbury Township Historic Preservation Committee. The plan is to offer these programs 3 times a year from 7 o'clock until 8:30 in the evening during the second Wednesday of April, July, and October. How many have attended a History Night before? Wow, most of you. Okay, thank you, and thank you for the newcomers. This basically History Night is supported by the Springettsbury Township supervisors, and a little housekeeping. Please silence your phones. The restrooms are located through that door and to your left. Other than when I ask a question of this group, I'd appreciate if you hold your questions till after the presentation, and then we can have a discussion. And as with all History Nights, this event is being recorded with the content viewable several weeks later as a YouTube video on the Springettsbury Township website. Now, I'm Stephen H. Smith. I'll be presenting the program tonight. I'll explore the history of rails through the township. That includes trolleys and regular rails of the various trains and railroads that went through the township. As a preview, History Night next year will start to include the occasional guest speaker. Now, during April 12th of 2023, History Night, in that night, Jerry Jones will give a talk on the geology and mining history of Springettsbury. Now, Jerry Jones is a geologist, and he recently retired as the longtime program coordinator for York County Parks. He was also a contributing writer for the Springettsbury Township Centennial book in 1991. So I'm sure you'll enjoy his talk next April. Later in 2023, I have talks planned in July and October. Now, where's the clicker? Okay. Tonight you will learn about station stops and stories of rails through Springettsbury. The event will focus on the history and impact of railroad and trolley service through the township. Rail service first went through this area in 1840. That was over 50 years prior to the establishment of Springettsbury Township in 1891. Nevertheless, this talk will focus on the land which is now Springettsbury back through 1840. Does anybody know what these represent?
Gauges of the rail.
Exactly, gauges of the rail. I'll be presenting on this gauge, which is standard gauge. That's what the major railroads through the area utilized. 4 feet, 8.5 inches between the rails. This is a narrow gauge. Springettsbury Township had a narrow gauge railway, which is this gauge. And the Ma and Pa Railroad actually started off as a narrow gauge and then eventually became a standard gauge. So, but that wasn't in Springettsbury Township. It came close. The Ma and Pa was on the western side of Mill Creek, which is the dividing line between Springettsbury Township and neighboring townships. So, but I'll talk about one of these narrow gauge and standard gauge in the township. Now, acknowledging some of the sources. This lists the primary sources for this presentation. They will be noted, as will others, throughout the talk. Thanks to all the organizations for access to their collections and to everyone that submitted photos. Before I focus on rails through Springettsbury, I'll set the stage with 2 background slides. Why were the first rails in the York County from Baltimore and not from Philadelphia? The answer is, in the early 1800s, commerce between York County and Baltimore was the preferred method of commerce with our neighbors. York Countyans viewed Pennsylvania government's attempt to force trade with Philadelphia as enriching the Philly merchants at the expense of the interior of the state. Now, the idea of a rail north out of Baltimore into York County had the support of York County farmers and businessmen. The original terminus was intended to be York Haven in York County, along the Susquehanna River, which is the reason the original railroad that Bishley built in this area was called the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad, the B&S. Now, within York County, construction of the 22 miles of track between the Maryland line and York began in 1837. The rail line followed the south branch of the Codorus Creek into York. The twisting nature of this creek and a large granite outcropping resulted in the building of 24 bridges and one tunnel. Essentially, the first rail service between Baltimore and York commences on August 23, 1838. Now, during those early years of train travel, as shown in this image, the steam engine did not have a cab, and the rail cars resembled groupings of stagecoaches on wheels. So that's what the early trains looked like in 1840. Also, in the 1830s and 1840s, the rails were not anything like we have today. The rails consisted of 5/8 inch thick by 2 1/4 inch wide pieces of strap iron nailed down flat on ample wooden rail bases known as stringers. And these were attached to wooden cross ties 6 inches square. The strap iron rails were spaced 4 feet 8.5 inches apart. And that was the same spacing early adopted in Britain as standard gauge. And that spacing followed suit in America. And basically the railroads out of Baltimore, which went west, the B&O used that gauge, and the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad, when it went westward out of Philadelphia and became the Pennsylvania Railroad, they both adopted the same gauge. So basically that comes from Britain, the 4 feet 8.5 inches, the standard gauge, and the early railroads adopted that, so that basically is the standard gauge across the country. Now, this presentation consists of 4 topics: the rails through the York Valley, then the rails through the Codorus Valley, all within Springettsbury Township, followed by a look at trolley service in the township, and finishing with a look at the impact of railroads and other services in the township. So we'll start with rails of York County, of York Valley. Now, as the next step, the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad decided from York Borough, the railroad should extend to the Susquehanna River at Wrightsville, 12 miles to the east, instead of the originally intended terminus at York Haven. The reason Wrightsville is directly across the river from Columbia, Lancaster County. Columbia was their eastern terminus of the Pennsylvania Canal and was also the soon-to-be terminal of the Pennsylvania and Columbus Railroad, which became the Pennsylvania Railroad. The rails were laid in 1840 and went through what is now Springettsbury Township. And in terms of present highways, those rails entered the township under the I-83 bridge near North Hills Road and Industrial Highway. They pass under Route 24, Mount Zion Road, and cross Route 462 in Stony Brook. So that's the route of the first railroad through Springettsbury Township in 1840. Opening day was June 1st, 1840, when one could board a train in Baltimore, travel through York to Wrightsville, use connections via the 1 mile long covered bridge across the Susquehanna River to Columbia and then board a train to Philadelphia. However, the steam engines were not allowed on the Susquehanna River covered bridge for fear of catching it on fire. The rail cars were instead pulled across the bridge via mules. So you can make that trek, but it was it took a long time. I think I've heard various stories, and I don't know which one to believe. It was basically a long trip because these trains were traveling about 15 miles an hour. Now, on the same broadside that noted, basically advertised for opening day, this drawing of a Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad's steam engine of 1840 is displayed. The 1830s saw rapid advances in locomotive design, with Yorker Phineas Davis as one of the major pioneers driving the advances in the early years of the 1830s. The strap iron lengths fastened to wooden stringers via nails or pin chains were proving to be a safety hazard. Trains running on tracks loosened the nails and dislodged the chain links, causing the ends of the strap iron lengths to pop up, either piercing the wooden passenger cars and harming or even killing passengers, or causing derailments. So these strap iron rails were dangerous. And actually, a derailing accident, basically from the strap iron rails, caused the death of Phineas Davis in 1835. So the solution was iron T-rails, introduced in 1852, which wore rapidly, so they were quickly replaced by steel T-rails, introduced in 1857, which are still used today. Now, the railroad emerged, basically the flat iron rail track, which had served the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad for nearly 2 decades. In 1852, the railroad's board of directors authorized rebuilding all track from the strap iron variety to T-rails. And they also needed to rebuild most of their bridges, which put the railroad in financial straits, and they ultimately went into bankruptcy. The railroad emerged from bankruptcy under a new name, the Northern Central Railway, which officially took over most of its properties on January 1st, 1855. And prior to the Civil War, all rails in what is now Springettsbury Township had been replaced with steel T-rails. So basically, prior to the Civil War, you had most of the railroads had been upgraded to the steel T-rails. Now, in looking at historic photos related to rails through Springettsbury, I've added the year the photo was taken. So whenever you see basically a year up here, that is the year the photo was taken. And this particular photo shows the topography, and an 1860 map suggests the stone foundations for the North Hills Road underpass may go back to the original 1840 railroad bridge. So you basically had stone foundations here, which might be original. The deck is probably new compared to 1840, and these concrete retaining walls are probably new, but I'm suspecting that might go back to 1840. Now, did anybody here ever travel that underpass? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, I did, and we got one person back there. Yeah, and essentially this underpass, 3-mile run, basically, which is this waterway here, basically it flows under here and through here. So whenever it flooded just a little bit, this underpass flooded. It's like repeatedly. Here's another view of that underpass in a newspaper clipping from 1959. It is the view I saw as an 8-year-old when our family moved from the Dallastown School District into a house at the upper end of North Hills Road. Years later, I used this newspaper clipping for a school writing assignment, which I entitled, "My Portal into Central Schools." So that was my portal into the Springettsbury Township through that, that opening there. Now, essentially, this is the crossing today. In 1960, North Hills underpass and approaches were filled in to create the railroad grade crossing, to correct the flooding issue, and to provide an easier connection with Industrial Highway when it was extended westward to North Hills Road, and that connection was made in 1962. This photo shows the rail crossing from a recent widening of North Hills Road. No more flooding, but not as fun to travel through. These are the railroad stations that at one time or another existed in Springettsbury Township. They are all along the railroad tracks between York and Wrightsville. 3 of the stations were platform stations, functioning as flag stops, where the train stopped only if the flag was displayed at the platform or a passenger or freight needed to be offloaded at that station. The Rockburn station at the end of Rockburn Street in the East York development featured a covered platform. I have a photo of that. But essentially, memories passed down from Heaston Station favor a covered platform, although occasionally I hear people mention a station building at that location. So I'm not exactly sure which is which. The only full-time railroad station in Springettsbury Township was in Stony Brook. More about that station is coming up later in this talk. And Kaufman Station, I actually have a partial picture of. We'll get into that along Stonewood Road. Now, this circa 1927 photo looks north along North Mount Zion Road, which was originally named Burlinger Road at the time this photo was taken. An arrow points to the wooden bridge over the railroad tracks. Now, the railroad tracks were in a natural depression at this point, so putting a railroad bridge across it was actually a fairly easy task. You didn't have to make many improvements to the sides to support that bridge. This particular bridge, I also note a vehicle here. Now, it's noted that Heaston Station was actually on the southeast corner of this intersection of the railroad and this road. So Heaston Station would have been down in here. So this vehicle is probably parking there, basically having access to the Heaston Station or waiting for somebody to arrive there and then take them back to their home or whatever. So this Heaston Station, I'm still looking for a photo of. So if anybody has a picture of Heaston Station, I'd like to get that. Now, this particular corner, this house over here, somebody told me it stood into the early 1950s. And then that was when York Corrugating basically built their factory in that property. So that's where York Corrugating plant is now located. This does not look anything like this today. You basically have almost 8 lanes and you still have major traffic jams. Now, the next we'll look at, this view looks along Stony Brook Road. The arrow points to one of the buildings that served as Stony Brook Station. Now, so this looks east on Stony Brook Road. The trolley went down the middle of this road, and the railroad runs right along this side of the road. So there was a platform in this area for the railroad station. The station house was here. And looking at that station house, that's what it looks like today. Now, this view basically the station, Stony Brook Station, is kind of, I've seen newspaper articles of it being at various places. This appears to be the one that is most consistent. I'll show you another one that is also mentioned. They mention in some of the articles, the station was a store at one time, and I confirmed via deeds this was a store, and it featured covered porches wrapping around 3 sides of the station office. So this particular building has like 3 porches around the office. So I believe this is probably the most dominantly used station in Stony Brook. It's 3759 Stony Brook Road now. So I'm still researching that further, but it's like you see mentions of it being at various places. But like I said, this is the dominant one. This is an annotated 1960 aerial photo of the Stony Brook area. We're looking westward in this photo with the railroad is in yellow. It's basically coming from York up here in this direction. So it's coming from York here, going through Stony Brook, and then heading to Wrightsville as you go down toward the bottom left. The station is located right here. Like I said, this predated, this is around 1840. It was in this area. It was later moved down to this area, which was Hauser's Mill, that actually became the Kreitz Creek Valley Farmers Co-op. It was down here for a while. And then there's a mention of another station that I haven't exactly determined where it was, but they all tend to be where the trolley and the railroad basically are at one place. So you can get off the trolley, wait there, and wait for a train, or get off the railroad and get on the trolley. And I'll get into this trolley bridge a little bit later when I talk about trolleys. The trolley, the York Railway Company that operated the trolleys, they are the ones that actually built that bridge. It was a bridge prior to the one that's there, though. So, like I said, I'll get into this a little bit more later. Although first, I'll talk about this bridge. There's a humpback bridge here, so you didn't have to drive at grade crossing over the railroad tracks. And that stood until 1998. How many remember going over that bridge? Okay, a lot of people remember that. Yeah. So here's the photo showing in the Gazette and Daily showing the building of that bridge. The September 11th, 1928 photo shows the progress of the construction of the supports and the steelwork to elevate the Lincoln Highway over the railroad, trolley, and the Stony Brook Road. Now, the grade level intersection of 2 railways, 2 roadways, 2 rail lines at a shallow angle with difficult lines of sight due to the surrounding buildings had resulted in deaths and accidents of many up to that point. The state moved forward with this project to try to alleviate that. So this shows a view of that from the looking east at Wasser's Stony Brook Mill, which was on the north side of the Lincoln Highway at that point. So this is like a couple of months after the this viaduct or humpback bridge opened. Now, Wasser basically had to, it was, let's see, what was his name? Nah, doesn't matter. But when he basically complained, and he was basically reimbursed by the state because his original entrance to the mill was on this side facing the Lincoln Highway, so suddenly he can't really use this at all. so he had to cut another place in, and right behind his building was the railroad. So he had basically a platform that he could go right onto the railroad, and they reimbursed him, but he still wasn't satisfied. And if you look at kind of another closer view, you can see the earth mounds that they had to put in to get to the bridge. And then, okay. Here's another view in 1965 where the mill has become the barn. And the barn always had signs, big signs on them, usually advertising various paints. How many remembers the big paint signs? Okay, you got some back there. They actually advertise, I forget the name of the paints that they advertise, but there's always a big painting sign up there. So 1965, this is what the view looked like looking east over the Humpback Bridge. This is a view looking west. So you basically had Stony Brook Road coming under the bridge, coming out here up to the stop sign, then you could get back onto the Lincoln Highway. And this is a view in 1998, just before they tore the bridge down. This is a view looking west. Stony Brook Road basically came down along here and then made a left. The railroad was in basically this area underneath the bridge. And this building here, which is, I'll zoom in, that building was basically Hauser's Mill and Creek Valley Farmers Co-op, which at one time was the rail station. This is the Etline's mansion or Victorian house that is, again, basically they sell antiques and various curiosities there. But like I said, this came down. And this is a view from the railroad bridge, the trolley bridge, looking west. It shows the rail tracks at that point. And you can see that it was kind of a natural ravine there. They basically had to cut through various rocks at that area. And in looking west, I can show you some basically, let's get here. So in looking west, the rail line from York to Riceville, it was operated by the Northern Central Railway until 1870, when it was sold directly to the Pennsylvania Railroad. So this became part of the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1870. Although before 1870, there was a mutual agreement between Northern Central and Pennsylvania Railroad. They basically shared a lot of properties. The last passenger service over these rails occurred in 1954. Now, freight service continues to the present and to the east as far as the rail sidings into American Hydro Plant in the eastern part of Springettsbury Townships. The rails do not continue in the Hellam Township. They were taken up, I think, right after Hurricane Agnes, because most of the bridges were basically destroyed at that time. So it basically comes out of York, goes through Spring Garden Township. At that time, Springettsbury Township was Spring Garden Township. And it basically goes along the east shore, or east side of the Cadorus Creek, and then crosses over the creek here at Black Bridge. So in the rails through this area, there were no railroad stations in this part of the railway that went through Springettsbury Township. The prominent sidings were at Locks Mill, at Nyman Sand and Supply Company, and at the Special Ordnance Plant of the York Safe and Lock Company, which became the Naval Ordnance Plant. So I have some pictures of those coming up a little bit later. Now, somebody asked me, did the Lincoln funeral train go through Springettsbury Township? And the answer is yes. Heading from York to Harrisburg, the train passed through what is now Springettsbury Township at 7 p.m. on April 21st, 1865. The locomotive pulling the funeral train is representative of the type used on the Northern Central in the 1860s, which is the reason why, if you look at it's almost identical to basically the new representation of that locomotive that rails, steam in the history used, which is now they term the Northern Central Railway of York. So they still run that in southern York County, and eventually they hope to have it on the rails up through at least York. So the dominant feature on this railway is a bridge over the Codorus. Now, this 1937 aerial photo is annotated to show the location of the northern end of the Northern Central Railway in Springettsbury Township, which is the railroad bridge over the Codorus Creek. That bridge was initially known as simply as the Codorus Bridge, and it later took on the name Black Bridge. In the shown area, south and east of the Codorus Creek, is Springettsbury Township. So this area in here, that's Springettsbury Township. North and west of the Codorus Creek is Manchester Township. Now, originally there was a road called Black Bridge Road that went on the Manchester Township shore, went under the railroad, and then it came up here and crossed the railroad and went up to Amicksville. Now that road in Hurricane Agnes, that road was kind of shut down, and they never rebuilt it. So the only way you can get in there is on service roads that the railroad had, or when the rail trail opened up. Now you can get up there on the Springettsbury Township shore. You can walk under North Black Bridge in this way. Now, the bridge over the Codorus at that point, it was built as a Howe Truss Bridge, which was patented in 1840 by William Howe. It was a two-span bridge with a total length of 336 feet. The bridge was designated number 98 in the Northern Central Railway inventory of bridges. The Howe Truss Bridge was economical because it used heavy use of timber and minimal use of iron. The Howe Truss quickly became the preferred long-span railroad bridge in the nation after it was developed. So you basically have the diagonal timbers in compression and the vertical irons are in tension. Now, this photo shows a typical two-span Howe Truss bridge of the construction common in the mid-1800s. The Codorus Bridge, built in 1848, probably appeared similar. However, in a report of the year 1860 in the records of the Northern Central Railway, note the bridge over the Codorus Creek, number 98, has been covered. Creating covered railway bridges by covering Howe Truss designs was not a very difficult process. This is a Library of Congress photo of Clark's Bridge in Grafton County, New Hampshire. It is one of only two Howe Truss covered bridges still standing in the United States, and the only one that is still in use. So this bridge is still in use. They basically had vents at the top for the steam engine smoke, and they basically had various treatments that they applied that they developed from the early 1850s through the whole length that these were used to suppress burning of them. So they had various treatments that they put on the timbers that would allow them to breathe so they wouldn't get rot inside, but it would also suppress any cinders that flew on them to prevent them from burning. So it's like there was a whole series of patents on various processes to treat these logs. And you don't want to paint them because if you paint a log like this, it can trap moisture, and trapped moisture are basically what causes rot. So if you go over a covered bridge, you will very rarely see the inside painted, and that's the reason. Now, in this, the Codorus Bridge, number 98, was one of the many railway bridges put out of commission during June of 1863 when Confederate forces invaded York County. On June 28th, rebels from the 17th Virginia Cavalry tried to burn the bridge. However, it would not burn. So I'm thinking it would have had one of these treatments that they were developing at that time. It might have been also reinforced with iron because it was the longest span bridge on the Northern Central Railway. The rebels had to resort to several powder charges to destroy the bridge. Within days, Union Brigadier General George Herman Hupp, U.S. Construction Corps, utilized portable bridge trusses, such as the one pictured, to basically put most of the Northern Central Railway back in business, replacing those bridges with these portable trusses. So this would have been the second bridge at that location. Afterwards, newspapers note the new permanent bridge will be of wood and of the Howe Truss patent. So the third bridge was another Howe Truss bridge. And that would have been built probably later in 1863. And it would have been a fairly easy process to do if they did not destroy the piers, which I didn't see any evidence that they destroyed the piers when they blew up these bridges. Now, this notice in the June 18th, 1875 issue of the York Daily is the earliest reference I found with the Black Bridge name of the bridge. It notes the bridge about 3 miles north of York over the Codorus, known as the Black Bridge, is being repaired. A newspaper article in 1925 noted the bridge got that name from all the smoke from the steam engines. Although there's another tale that's been passed down by word of mouth that tells another story of a long ago railroad bridge maintenance crew that misheard their painting instructions for that bridge. And instead of only painting the iron tie rails, all the other iron hardware, the crew painted everything black, timbers included, which was actually a no-no on a bridge, covered bridge especially. The bridge maintenance crew took a lot of ribbing for their Black Bridge, which became its nickname until eventually it became the official name of that bridge. With this notice in the June of 1875 noting Black Bridge is being repaired in mind, a later Northern Central report in 1875 notes this bridge was entirely rebuilt. So there might have been rot inside those timbers, which kind of leads credence to the story of painting the whole bridge black. So the painting mishap probably occurred in the bridge that was built in 1863 that lasted until 1875. After 1875, they put another Howe Truss bridge up, and we actually have a photo of that one. This photo is from the collection of the York County History Center, and the guy that submitted it is the great-great-grandson of this guy, who is John S. Sipe. And when I looked him up on Ancestry, he was born in 1847, died in 1913. His occupation is a carpenter, so that's consistent because my grandfather was a carpenter on the Pennsylvania Railroad. His occupation on census is carpenter. So it makes sense. Now, this fourth bridge, the loads were increasing. Like the locomotives are getting heavier and they're carrying more loads. On Howell Truss bridges, as the loads increased, on a lot of them, they added a burr arch here to support the bridge. And you can see that at various places where the arch is put in and they put a support from the arch to help support the Howell Truss Bridge. So this was done probably near the end of its life. And in 1889, they decided to bite the bullet and put in basically a girder span bridge. So that brings us to this bridge. So this is a circa 1907 Black Bridge postcard. This postcard shows a 4-span wrought iron girder bridge, which was built in 1889. So that's the 5th bridge at this site. The photographer is standing in Manchester Township along Black Ridge Road and looking into Springettsbury Township. And if you notice here, basically this bridge, they had to add 2 new piers because the original bridge was a 2-span. So they had basically the supports on the side and this one in the center. So they had to add these 2 to create the 4-span girder bridge that is made of wrought iron. So we're looking at this again, and it basically is showing, like I said, this particular road underneath the bridge is in Manchester Township in this one. So I just simply wanted to refresh that the Black Ridge Road basically ran on Manchester Township side originally. Now this is a picture of a railroad crew at Black Bridge in 1934. So they're sitting on the Springettsbury Township side of the 6th bridge at Black Bridge site. Now, due to the increased railroad traffic in 1825, the wrought iron girders were replaced with steel girders. So this marks this as the 6th bridge. And as a result of the flood of 1933, this crew was sent out to reinforce the center pier because it had cosmetic damages and they weren't sure if it could stand up to that type of a flood. Now on this photo, that's my dad. That was his first day on the job for the Pennsylvania Railroad. So he worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad for 10 years before World War II. And then later on, basically he started the York Air Cooling and Heating Company, which is still in business along Whiteford Road in Springettsbury Township. So that was the first day on the job. And he got the job because his dad was a foreman for the Pennsylvania Railroad. So my grandfather Smith, Luther Smith, was a foreman for 40 years on the Pennsylvania Railroad. His first job was at Black Bridge. And my dad's brother here is Paul Smith, and his uncle is here. So if you had a job with the Pennsylvania Railroad in the 1800s and early 1900s, if you had a job there, you could get your family in pretty easy. It was basically a family business almost. It's like, I'm surprised how many people were related to each other that were working on various crews, either on the trains or maintenance. So that's their work in 1835. This is a current picture of it. It stood up during Hurricane Agnes. One of the first places my dad wanted to go after Hurricane Agnes. He wanted to see what this looked like, and it still stood. So we did a good job. So that's the central pier. And inside it is probably the 1848 original pier. So they just kept building around it to make it stronger and stronger. So this is a view looking up the Codorus Creek from the rail trail, and it shows one of the 1889 piers put in when they put the first girder bridges in. And this is a view looking up downstream on the Codorus, on the rail trail, that you can see the Springettsbury side of the bridge. Now, I haven't really determined where the township line is. Like the township lines or the county line on the Susquehanna, Lancaster actually owns the river. The county line runs right along the York County side. I'm not sure how this happened here, since Springettsbury is a newer township than Manchester. Does Manchester Township own the Codorus, or is the line down the middle? So maybe Randall can find that out. Yeah.
Township gets called if there's a body that floats on it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. Check with the firefighters. They probably know.
Yeah, the signs for Springettsbury, sorry.
Yeah.
Springettsbury's on one side of the Emmy Bridge, and then Manchester's on the other.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It might be no man's land yet.
Yeah. So, in one of the nicest trains that run on the tracks near the Susquehanna in Springettsbury Township was the Liberty Limited. It was one of the initial trains of Pennsylvania Railroad's fleet of modernization that debuted in 1938. It featured streamlined designs and color schemes by the famous industrial designer Raymond Lowery. The Liberty Limited traveled the 836 miles between Washington, D.C. and Chicago with only 12 intermediate stops. York was one of the stops. In open stretches, the Liberty Limited approached 100 miles an hour. So going 100 miles an hour on a train in 1939 was probably a new experience for most people. Now, the construction of the interstate highway system and the rapid rise of reasonably priced long-distance air travel had a big impact on practically overnight, causing the decline in ridership of long-distance trains. December of 1957, the Liberty Limited was dropped from the Pennsylvania Railroad schedules. In 1971, the last scheduled passenger train stops in York was a single-car Penn Central train which ran between Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. It was nicknamed the Ghost Train because many times it went with no passengers. This 1959 aerial photo is annotated to show another important rail bridge in Springettsbury Township. The eastern ramps and a rail bridge are part of a railroad project in 1948 to carry Arsenal Road vehicle traffic over 4 rail grade crossings over near just north of the rail yard. So this is the original Arsenal Road before 1948. It had to cross 4 tracks here. And the cars were going into the rail yard, so you had cars going back and forth all the time. I've heard people that had to wait there for 20 to 30 minutes regularly, almost like today, along Arsenal Road. They said traffic would back up past North Sherman Street, almost like today. Yeah. So in 1894, there was actually a planned railroad that went up through the Codorus Valley. It was a proposed expansion of the Western Maryland Railroad, whose rails had reached York City in 1893. Now, even before reaching York, the Western Maryland Railroad was planning this extension that would pass under the right side of Black Bridge and then travel along the south side of the Codorus Creek and York County side of the Susquehanna River to a new bridge they planned to go over the Susquehanna River. That railroad bridge would be at an elevation high enough to pass over the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks on the Lancaster County side at Chickies, whereupon the Western Maryland would connect with the Reading Railroad, which was already at that location. After years of planning, agreements were in place with the Reading Railroad, and property and some rights-of-way were already purchased, all pointing to a planned 1894 start of construction. So why wasn't it built? It was bad timing. There was a stock market crash on June 27, 1893, which began up to that point the greatest depression in the United States history. By the end of 1893, 600 banks had failed, 74 railroads had gone out of business, and more than 15,000 commercial businesses had collapsed. When financial conditions were favorable again, what happened was the Pennsylvania Railroad dropped their freight charges just enough so that it did not make financial sense to move forward with the project. So Pennsylvania Railroad didn't want the competition, so they dropped their prices, which was good for the York County people that used the rail freight in this area. But that's the reason we don't have that railroad. But I thought I'd include a little slide on it. So I'll get into trolley service here, right on schedule. This is a photo of the York Railways Company trolley car number 327 that regularly made runs through this area. Trolley cars ran on steel rails and are propelled by onboard electric motors. The cars have spring-loaded trolley poles that raise to engage an overhead electric wire, thereby drawing power to run the electric motor. However, for the motors to operate, the circuit must be closed through a ground, which is done from the steel wheels to the steel rails. So when the car is going in this direction, you have this pole raised to contact the wire. When the car is going in the opposite direction, they bring this one down and they raise this one. So they can go to the end of the line and they don't have to turn around. The operator simply moves to the other end of the car and changes the poles that go up and connect with the upper wires, and they come back to York. So this particular trolley, it went between York and Wrightsville. So you had two railways going between York and Wrightsville. Almost on the same path, but not quite. Basically, you had this trolley line basically went along the south side of Route 462, almost the whole way from York to Wrightsville. The one exception was Stony Brook. We'll get into that a little bit more, why they did something different there. Back, okay. Yeah, that's where, okay. Now, the trolley stops, there were 18 trolley stops that existed at one time or another in Springettsbury Township. The stops are in order from the trolley traveling from York to Wrightsville. The trolley entering Springettsbury Township at Mill Creek went just west of the present East Market Street interchange of I-83, which was near the location of a blacksmith shop. So, and these are from trolley schedules. So the name of that stop was Blacksmith. So it was at a blacksmith shop. And stops 2 through 6 served the East York development. So those are streets or locations in the East York development. Stops 7 through 10 are prior to Mount Zion Road. So you get the Trollgate, Valley House, T.A. Myers, Yorkshire. Then you get up to stop Heaston Station. And you don't actually stop at the station. You stop at the intersection of Mount Zion Road and Market Street, and you had to walk up Mount Zion Road to the station. But that's the reason they call it Heaston Station. It's the closest you can get to Heaston Station at that point. And then as you go from Mount Zion Road to Stony Brook, you have Bloomingdale, Hauser's Lane, Stony Run, Markley, and then you get to the Stony Brook Station. And then after the Stony Brook Station, you're at Kaufman Station, which is the station on Stonewood Road and the railroad. So you stop at Stonewood Road and you have to walk down to the railroad to get on Kaufman Station. And then you have the health school as the final stop, and it stops right at basically the steps that come down from Crandall's Health School. Yep. Yeah, it's okay. So, technology. So this is a 1924 eastward view of the Old Valley Inn, which is the site where the York Mall was, where Sam's Club now, or Sam's Supercenter, Walmart exists. So essentially, you see the Hillican Highway going down through there, and you see the trolley tracks on the right side. They basically had, if you're in areas like this, they basically had these supports over from poles that basically had the trolley line on. They didn't have them going the whole way across the street at places. So they had poles coming out that kept the live wire for the trolley above the trolley tracks. In this view, this is a circa 1925 westward view where Locust Grove Road intersects with the Lincoln Highway. The trolley car is on a bridge over Stony Run. So this is the bridge over Stony Run, just east of Locust Grove Road. And then the trolley car is coming across the Lincoln Highway. So it's not staying on the south side of the Lincoln Highway here. So when it comes across, it basically, here's a closer view of the car. And on that, you can see the banner. You might not be able to see in the back, but the banner says Wrightsville. It gives the car number 319, and it notes this is the last car. So this is the last car of the day going to Wrightsville. And you can tell it's going to Wrightsville because if you look at the top here, this the pole going up to the wire, live wire, is up on the back side of the car, and the one on the front is down. So it's going to Wrightsville. So you have two evidences that points to the direction it's going. And this is a view looking to the east of the same car. Probably on 2 different days the photographer took this. So the car is ready to go up where Pleasant Acres Road is now. At that time, it was strictly a trolley road. And the garage here, this is the Stony Brook garage, which was primarily, in later life, a Pontiac dealership. So the trolley would go up this route, up to the bridge, over the railroad, and at that time, the trolley company basically put that road in, put the bridge in. It was strictly for trolley use. You go up to the top, you make a right, go a right turn, and you're going down Pleasant Acres Road, or at that time was actually Stony Brook Road that went the whole way up. So then you go down, the trolley goes down Stony Brook Road, you see this before, down the middle of Stony Brook Road, stops at the Stony Brook Station where a passenger could get off, wait on the porch until a railroad comes by and stops there, and then you can get on the railroad and go wherever you wanted to go on the railroad. So this is, again, the combination trolley station, railroad station. And essentially, why did they do this? It was a couple of different reasons. I think Stony Brook Station was the only permanent railroad station in the township. So they wanted the trolley to stop there where the train stopped. So in order to get there, it was actually fairly easy to do to obtain this property that went up to this area. And if you remember, it's basically a natural ravine there anyway, so building a bridge across there was actually fairly easy to do, simply for just the trolley car. So going up there and then coming back, the trolley would leave the station here, go back down along the middle of Stony Brook Road, and then back onto the Lincoln Highway on the south side of it. And before the Humpback Bridge in 1929, it basically went right across the highway, which is this photo here. So it's going from Stony Brook Road, which is basically to this side here, off to the side. It comes back across the Lincoln Highway and then goes along the south side of the Lincoln Highway. And this is the Etline property. And the reason you have a gas pump here, that was operated by the Kreitz Creek Valley Farmers Co-op that had the mill building, which is right next to, or not just west of the mansion that Etlines eventually have. And then their barn is on the other side of this. It's all blocked out by their house. But their barn was actually originally a bank building, and basically you had earthen ramp to go up to the second floor. And the big window you have there now was originally where the barn doors were on the second level of the barn. So you can zoom in here and you can actually make out that it's a poster on the back advertising something on May 28th. So something was going on May 28th that they were advertising. Now, this particular photo is another trolley-related photo. And that particular photo shows the grading occurring on East Market Street as if you're standing down on Finley Street in the old East York development looking east. And what's going on here is they're grading the street following the removal of the trolley tracks. Because when East York was developed, the availability of access to the trolley was heavily promoted as the reason you should buy a house in that area. The trolley tracks shared the southern lane of East Market Street in the early years. So East Market Street was a two-lane road, but on the south lane, they basically had trolley tracks embedded in it. So if you're on the south side, you had to keep watching out for trolley trolls and dodge them. But what happened is a third traffic lane was built on the south side of East Market Street in 1932. And then the trolley basically was dedicated to the center lane. So you had 3 lanes on East Market Street in that area. When the trolley service to Wrightsville was discontinued on February 1st of 1933, the residents of East York neighborhood were able to convince the company that enough riders would use it such that the trolley service out to Kershaw Street continued until all trolley service ended on February 4th, 1939. So when service ended on that in 1939, right after that, basically they tore up East Market Street in that area and you had a 3-lane road from that time on. And then it was basically wide lanes. The lanes you have now basically are narrower, so you have a 4-lane road now in that area. But that was created essentially for the trolley. Now, the narrow gauge, or the Pleasant Acres Road, that bridge, trolley bridge, this is a picture of the trolley bridge, which when the trolley service was discontinued, the trolley company turned it over to the township for use. They paved the road. It was a single-lane road that went up to the county home. And the county home was developed the county bought that farm up in that area where Pleasant Acres is in, I think it's 1929. 1930, they moved the county poorhouse up there, and the people at that poorhouse basically farmed, the county farm in that area. Later on in, let's see, I think I have the date or something. Yeah, later on, after the county put a new medical building attached to the poorhouse in 1950, they made a shift to making that facility institutionalized nursing care. And in 1952, it was renamed Pleasant Acres. So the road becomes Pleasant Acres Road in 1952. So this particular shortcut here, the township and the county were haggling over who has the responsibility for maintaining that bridge. Because like I said, the trolley company gave it to the township, but it was primarily being used for the county to get to their facilities. So ultimately, I think the county actually paid for most of it, although I think the township kicked in. It's like I get different stories depending on which newspaper articles you read. But this was the original trolley bridge, which was a one-lane bridge. And then the bridge that you have there now is a two-lane concrete bridge that was put in by either probably a combination of the county and the township, which after the road goes in, I guess up the grade level road goes in, this probably bridge will go away. So the last topic here, still on time, is looking at other railroads. And these are railroads associated with businesses. So this particular railroad, that's where it's located in the township. And it's actually a business created for their business. It was a narrow gauge railway next to Stonewood Road, built in 1905. And that railway was for the Stony Brook Slate and Brick Company. So they built this 3-foot gauge, which is this one here, compared to the standard gauge. So essentially, you basically have the narrow gauge railway here goes from the brick plant down this direction, which is looking south along the side, it'd be the east side of Stonewood Road. This is another view of the brick company in 1905 versus the same view from 2012. So this is now I guess the parking lot for some of the employees of the Apex tool group, which is they make tools. Although they primarily make here they still make Campbell chain here in this plant. Now, who remembers the Stonewood Road zig? Anybody? As you went up Stonewood Road, south on Stony Brook Road from Market Street up here, you came to an area, went sharp turn, and then another sharp turn. These were blind turns because you had trees lining and hedges lining both sides. That was there before the railroad existed, but the railroad utilized that as an easy way to get on the other side of Stonewood Road because their quarry was on their brick plant was on the east side of Stonewood Road and their quarry was on the west side of Stonewood Road. So this is a steam shovel loading cars at the quarry along Stonewood Road in 1905. And Stonewood Road is it's in the south end of Springettsbury Township. It intersects with Mountain Road in Windsor Township. So this is just about at the intersection of Mountain Road and Stonewood Road. The quarry went much deeper than it is now. It was since basically filled in. And this is the type of locomotive that ran on this particular railroad. It was basically almost like it was a mining locomotive that primarily used for mines or construction work. So this is an ad for the brick produced there. It says, use Stony Brook red pressed brick, the finest pressed brick in southern Pennsylvania. And some of the buildings that we know that use this brick, most of the brick from this plant was actually shipped to other locations. It was basically a higher price brick than most of the brick produced in York County, and York County has been cheap. They wanted the cheap brick. So they wanted the cheap brick. And so a lot of this brick actually went to other places that valued the more expensive brick, but some of the places actually used it. You have the residence of Winfield Hauser, which is now Marino's Pizza and Pasta House. The inn that was built by John Hauser, which is now Paddock on Market. And the Stony Brook Mennonite Church used this. So those are some confirmed places that use this brick. Also places in York, and there's some places in Helen that use this. So looking at some of the other businesses that had rail sidings, first is Locke's Cadorus Mills, which existed before railroads arrived to York County. However, after it arrived, the mill's production was increased substantially because they basically had better access to their main buyers, which were in Baltimore. So you could load the rail cars on their siding in barrels, and you could easily ship it down to Baltimore. You had the Newman Sand Plant, which was constructed in 1915 along what is now the rail trail. And they basically had a separate siding where their cars stacked up, and it had like a conveyor that went in to load the cars, and then they moved the cars down a little bit and load the next one. So they had a dedicated rail siding also. You had, when the special ordnance plant, when S. Locks was looking for a location for a special ordnance plant, he needed a plant that had a rail siding. So again, because we had the railroad, it was located here. So this is the railroad going up along the rail trail, basically goes here along the Doris, and you have the railroad come up here, and you had a siding going here. You had a siding going to the power plant, and you had a siding that actually went through the back parts of these buildings. So you could take an overhead crane and move an equipment across that building and drop it on the rail car and come out in the railroad. Now, the Pennsylvania Railroad had a division, a realty division, that in the 1950s, in looking at, they were buying up a lot of property and selling it at a profit. So I think they viewed their business was on the downfall, so that I think they utilized this realty division to help their bottom line. One area that they had bought, they actually bought all the land south of Arsenal Road between their rail yard and North Sherman Street is like 90 acres. They said we might put a rail yard in there, but they ended up selling it off at a profit for development. So that's how, like I said, the railroads got involved in helping develop the township. Another place that they bought in 1953, the Realty Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad acquired the airport that was along the Lincoln Highway where the York Mall and the McCroy's Distribution Center would be built. So they basically purchased this property, touting that this will be a future rail yard, but then they go and sell it off at a profit. So this is what it looks like later in 1967. And you basically had the McCroy's Regional Headquarters and Distribution Center. Now, the McCroy's, the 17-acre distribution center might have been one of the first warehouses in York County. We're known as a warehouse county now. This might have been the first one, because that's a fairly big warehouse there. And you note that they have rail sidings going into it. So you have rail sidings going into that. You have rail sidings going into the York Container. And York Container still uses the rail siding quite a bit. They have big rolls of paper that they use to make their corrugated display items. They come in on rail to the York rail yard, and they found it was cheaper to actually purchase a locomotive, their own locomotive, to take it from the rail yard to their plant. So when you see the locomotive sitting at their plant, that's actually York Corrugating's locomotive. It's cheaper to own a locomotive and take those products from the rail yard to their plant rather than paying the freight to do that. And the last one, I got a couple questions about this. So I'm going to finish right on time again. The last rail item to be shared tonight deals with the I-83 bridge. Now, this is a railroad bridge over I-83. I-83 goes over this railroad. Now, these tracks are the tracks that were put in 1840. Might not be the original tracks, but they're at the same location. And people are asking me, with the bridge being closed on Market Street, why didn't they run a bridge through this area? Like, they have an opening here. Why didn't they run a bridge through there? So that was a good question. So I decided to take another look at it. What's on the other side of those trees? So actually, I found a photo, an aerial photo, 1959, which is 2 weeks before I-83 opens. So this is an eastward-looking photo. You have Springettsbury Township. This is Mill Creek. So Springettsbury Township is on this side, and this is Spring Garden Township on this side. I discovered prior to the bridge I-83 going through, Heilig Brothers Company, who had basically a wire mesh, a wire screen manufacturing plant here that was built in 1952. They actually acquired all this land in 1951, and they offered, I guess, use of part of their land to build a road through this area and through their property. But this is where a lot of sinkholes were found, and it became very uneconomical to build such a, and this is the area where Locke's cave, where you could actually travel almost 100 feet underground in their various cave systems. That was filled in when this company built there, but they always had cave-ins, sinkholes in this particular area. So it wasn't deemed it was doable to put a road through there. So that's the reason the road didn't go through it. But if you look when this was developed, Industrial Highway had not yet reached Mount North Hills Road. Industrial Highway would be coming, down, go old tech here. Industrial Highway would be coming down in this area here, yeah. So that was not put into until 1962. So when that was put in, that would have been another chance to put that in, but like I said, they didn't. But it would have been a nice shortcut to, and even so, it would relieve a lot of traffic, so I think they should look at that again. So that essentially wraps up this talk. So thanks for your attention. I intended to be exactly at 8:20. It's like perfect time. So if you have any questions,